That should have been the end of our story. A miraculous encounter between species that resulted in a life saved and a bond formed. But what happened over the following months proved that some connections transcend single moments and grow into something that changes both lives forever. The lioness I had helped, whose distinctive ear notch I learned to recognize from a distance, had apparently marked me as something special in her world. Not 2 weeks after our first encounter, I was conducting routine observations when I spotted familiar movement in the distance. It was her again. The same lioness with the notched ear. But this time she wasn't carrying a sick cub. She was leading her healthy son, who was now thriving under her care. They approached to within 20 meters of my position, and then something extraordinary happened. The lioness lay down and began grooming her cub while maintaining eye contact with me. She was showing me her child. She was demonstrating that the cub I had helped save was healthy and strong. It was a progress report delivered in the most primal way possible. A mother showing off her thriving offspring to the person who had made it possible. The cub, now confident and playful, began exploring the area around his mother. At one point he wandered to within 5 meters of my position and showed no fear whatsoever. This was unprecedented behavior. Wild lion cubs are taught from birth to avoid humans. But this little one had been handled by humans during his medical treatment, and his mother had clearly communicated that I was safe. Over the following weeks, this pattern repeated itself. The lioness would bring her cub to visit my research area, always maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly wanting me to see how well he was developing. She was keeping me updated on his progress, like a proud parent sharing photos of their child's achievements. But the real breakthrough came 6 weeks after our initial encounter. I was reviewing footage from my remote cameras when I noticed something that made me call my research supervisor immediately. The lioness had been visiting my equipment regularly when I wasn't there. She would approach the cameras, sniff them carefully, and then position herself directly in front of the lens. She was posing for pictures. A wild lioness was intentionally documenting her presence for my benefit. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the University of Cape Town came to investigate what was happening at my research site. She was initially skeptical of my reports, believing that I was anthropomorphizing normal animal behavior. But after reviewing hours of camera footage, she became convinced that we were witnessing something unprecedented in human-animal relationships. The evidence was overwhelming. The lioness was exhibiting complex social behaviors, typically reserved for members of her own species. She was treating me as an honorary member of her pride. She would bring her cub to visit. She would mark territory around my research area. And she even began sharing kills by leaving portions of her prey near my equipment. The scientific implications were staggering. We were documenting the formation of an interspecies social bond in real time. A wild lioness had not only overcome her natural fear of humans, but had actively incorporated a human into her social structure. She had redefined her understanding of family to include the person who had saved her child. But the most incredible development came 3 months after our first meeting. The lioness approached my research blind, carrying something in her mouth, but it wasn't her own cub. It was another cub from a different pride. This little one was sick, showing the same symptoms that her own cub had displayed months earlier. She had brought me another patient. The pattern was identical to our first encounter. She pushed the sick cub toward me, backed away, and waited. But this time, her own healthy cub remained by her side, watching the proceedings with curious eyes. She was teaching her offspring about the human who could heal the wounded. She was passing down cultural knowledge about seeking help across species boundaries. I treated the second cub with the same care I had shown the first. The little female responded well to antibiotics and supportive care. But when it came time for reunion, I faced a dilemma. This cub belonged to a different pride. How would I return her to her biological family? The answer came from the lioness herself. She led me through the savannah for over 2 kilometers until we reached a small pride of lions resting under an acacia tree. Among them was a lioness who immediately stood up and began vocalizing when she saw us approaching. It was the sick cub's mother. The lioness who had brought me the patient had somehow communicated with the biological mother and arranged this reunion. The handoff was seamless. The biological mother approached, cautiously accepted her healthy cub back, and then did something that left me speechless. She looked at me and made the same bowing gesture that the first lioness had made. Word had spread through the lion community. I had been identified as a healer, and the knowledge was being shared across pride boundaries. Over the next year, I treated 17 more lion cubs, all brought to me by various members of the local lion population. Each case followed the same protocol. Approach with the sick cub, push the patient toward me, back away, and wait. They had developed a standardized procedure for seeking human medical assistance. Dr. Walsh published our findings in the journal Nature, and the response from the international scientific community was immediate. Researchers from around the world came to study what became known as the Thompson Protocol. We were documenting the evolution of a new form of interspecies cooperation that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and social behavior. But for me, the most meaningful moments weren't the scientific breakthroughs or media attention. They were the quiet encounters with the lioness who had started it all. She continued to visit my research site, regularly bringing her now adolescent son to maintain the bond we had formed. Watching them approach with complete trust and confidence reminded me daily of the miracle we had created together. A breakthrough moment came when her son, now a young adult, brought his own cub to meet me. 3 generations of lions had learned to trust humans for medical assistance. The behavior that had started with one desperate mother's plea for help had become a cultural tradition passed down through the generations. The young male approached my blind with the same confidence his mother had eventually developed. He placed his healthy cub at my feet, not because the baby was sick, but because he wanted to introduce the next generation to the human who had become part of their extended family. I was witnessing the birth of a new tradition in lion society. Today, 4 years after that first encounter, when I thought a lioness would attack, but instead watched her push her cub toward me, like she was begging, my research site has become a recognized medical facility for the lion population of the Okavango Delta. The original lioness is now a grandmother, and her extended family includes over 20 lions across 3 generations, all of whom view me as a trusted ally. The security footage from that first day, when a desperate mother overcame every instinct to seek help from a human, has been studied by researchers worldwide. But for me, the real significance isn't the scientific recognition or conservation impact. It's the daily reminder that love, desperation, and hope are universal languages that transcend species boundaries. The lioness who pushed her dying cub toward me taught me that when a mother is desperate enough, she will rewrite the rules of nature itself. She will overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming, trust her greatest enemy, and create new possibilities for cooperation between species. Her desperate plea for help became the foundation for a relationship that has changed both of our lives forever. Every morning when I arrive at my research site, I scan the horizon hoping to see that familiar silhouette approaching with confident strides, because I know that each visit represents another opportunity to strengthen the incredible bond we've built together. A bond that started with a mother's desperate push of her dying cub toward a human she should have feared, and has grown into something that's redefining what's possible between our species. The tears in her eyes that first day weren't just expressions of desperation. They were the beginning of a communication that would bridge 2 worlds and prove that sometimes the most profound connections are born from the most impossible circumstances. She thought I might be her enemy, but chose to trust me anyway, and in doing so, she created a miracle that continues to grow stronger with each passing day. I've been a field researcher in Botswana's Okavango Delta for 9 years, and I thought I understood predator behavior until the day a lioness shattered everything I believed about wild animal instincts. What I'm about to tell you sounds impossible, but I have witnesses and video evidence to prove every word. My name is Dr. Michael Thompson, and this is the story of how a mother's desperation taught me that some bonds transcend species and survival instincts. It was March 3rd, 2024 at approximately 11:30 a.m. when I first saw her. I was conducting behavioral observations from my elevated blind when movement in the tall grass caught my attention. A lioness was approaching my position, but something about her gait was wrong. She wasn't moving with the fluid confidence of an apex predator. She was limping, favoring her right front paw, and her head hung low with exhaustion. As she got closer, I could see she was carrying something in her mouth. My first thought was that she had made a kill and was bringing it to shade to feed. But as the distance closed, I realized what she was carrying was much smaller than typical prey. It was a cub. Her cub. And from the way it hung motionless in her grip, I could tell something was seriously wrong. The lioness stopped about 30 meters from my blind and set the cub down gently. That's when I saw the full extent of the situation. The cub was barely breathing, its tiny chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements. There were visible wounds on its small body, and its eyes were glazed with fever. This wasn't a healthy cub being relocated. This was a dying baby, and its mother was running out of options. What happened next defied every instinct that should have governed her behavior. Instead of retreating to find a safe place for her cub to die in peace, she looked directly at my blind. She had spotted me. In 9 years of field research, I had never had a lioness make direct eye contact with me from such close range. Predators typically avoid human contact at all costs. But this mother was desperate, and desperation makes animals do impossible things. She began walking toward my blind. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. A 350-pound lioness was approaching my position with clear intent. My hand moved instinctively toward the flare gun that was my only defense against large predators. But something about her body language stopped me from firing. She wasn't stalking. She wasn't hunting. Her ears weren't pinned back in aggression. She was approaching like she had something important to communicate. 20 meters, 15 meters, 10 meters. With each step, I could see more details of her condition. She was emaciated, clearly having gone days without eating. Her golden coat was matted with dirt and dried blood. This wasn't just a mother with a sick cub. This was a lioness at the end of her rope, physically and emotionally exhausted from trying to save her child. At 5 meters, she stopped and did something that made my blood run cold. She picked up her cub, walked 2 more steps toward my blind, and then gently pushed the tiny body in my direction. She wasn't attacking. She wasn't threatening. She was offering. She was presenting her dying child to me like she was begging for help. I sat frozen in my elevated position, staring down at this impossible scene. A wild lioness had just entrusted me with her most precious possession. She had overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming that told her humans were threats, and instead had identified me as her last hope for saving her cub. The lioness backed away 3 steps, and then did something even more extraordinary. She lay down. A wild predator had made herself vulnerable in front of a human. She was showing me that she trusted me completely, that she was willing to put her own safety at risk if there was even the smallest chance I could help her baby. I climbed down from my blind, slowly keeping my movements calm and predictable. The lioness watched my every move, but showed no signs of aggression. When I knelt beside her cub, She made a soft vocalization that sounded almost like a whimper. She was talking to me. A wild lioness was trying to communicate with a human about her dying child. The cub was in critical condition. It was a male, maybe 6 weeks old, and he was burning with fever. There were infected puncture wounds on his tiny legs, probably from a hyena attack. His breathing was labored, and his pulse was weak and rapid. Without immediate medical intervention, he would be dead within hours. I looked up at the lioness and made a decision that could have cost me my life. I spoke to her. I explained in a calm, quiet voice that I needed to take her cub to get medical help. I told her I would do everything in my power to save him, but that I needed her to trust me. The lioness tilted her head as if she was listening to every word. When I gently lifted her cub, she made a sound I had never heard from a lion before. It was heartbreaking. It was the sound of a mother letting go of her child because she had no other choice. I carried the cub to my research vehicle while the lioness followed at a distance. She maintained visual contact the entire time, making sure she could see what I was doing with her baby. When I placed the cub in a transport carrier, she approached the vehicle and sniffed the air around the carrier. She was memorizing the scent, making sure she would be able to track her child. The nearest veterinary facility was 3 hours away at the Mon Wildlife Clinic. I made the drive in record time while the lioness followed my vehicle for the first 10 kilometers before finally stopping at what must have been the edge of her territory. Through my rearview mirror, I could see her sitting in the road watching my vehicle disappear into the distance. She had done everything she could. Now it was up to me. Dr. Lisa Patel at the Wildlife Clinic had treated hundreds of injured animals, but never a lion cub that had been voluntarily surrendered by its mother. The examination revealed the full extent of the cub's condition. He had severe sepsis from the infected wounds and was dangerously dehydrated. His body temperature was critically low, and his blood work showed signs of organ failure. The next 48 hours were touch and go. We administered aggressive antibiotic therapy, 4 fluids, and supportive care around the clock. There were moments when I thought we were going to lose him, but this little fighter had inherited his mother's determination. Slowly, gradually, he began to respond to treatment. His fever broke, his appetite returned, and by the 3rd day, he was showing signs of the playful curiosity that defines healthy lion cubs. But saving the cub was only half the challenge. Now I had to figure out how to reunite him with his mother. Wild lionesses don't typically accept cubs that have been handled by humans. The scent contamination alone could cause rejection. But this wasn't a typical situation. This mother had specifically sought human help for her child. I returned to the location where I had first encountered the lioness carrying the now healthy cub in a transport carrier. I wasn't sure she would still be in the area after 4 days, but I had to try. As I approached the spot where she had first pushed her cub toward me, I heard a sound that made my heart race. It was a low, rumbling call. She was there. She had been waiting. The lioness emerged from the tall grass and approached my vehicle with cautious optimism. I could see the desperate hope in her eyes as she searched for any sign of her cub. When I opened the carrier and the healthy cub stumbled out calling for his mother, the reunion was one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed. The lioness immediately began grooming her cub, checking every inch of his body with a rough tongue. The cub nuzzled into his mother's warmth, purring loudly enough that I could hear it from 10 meters away. They were together again, and the relief was palpable from both mother and child. But then the lioness did something that still gives me chills. She looked directly at me and slowly lowered her massive head in what could only be interpreted as a bow. She held that position for several seconds, making sure I understood her gratitude. Then she picked up her healthy cub and began to walk away. But after about 50 meters, she stopped, turned back, and made a sound that wasn't quite a roar. It was softer, more melodic. She was saying thank you in the only way she knew how.